We have a very special guest, Sister Jane Wakayu. If I speak well this surname, beautiful. Sister Jane is from Kenya. She's a little sister of St. Francis from Kenya. And for us represents the female face and the sister face of what Conrad and Hilton Foundation is doing and accompanying the religious life of Catholic sisters in their formation, in their mission, in their developing of services all over the world. So we thank her and we acknowledge in her a very prepared and skilled sister who is helping always in accompanying these projects all over the world and in dialogue with USG for already some years on. So we are very happy to have you here in presence, not only online. And also who may not know and who may not listen to the presentation of the care for our old sisters. It was done, I think, past 1 month ago. Today with us is also Father Thomas Gaunt, a Jesuit from the United States, from Carolina. His presence here is due to his research, and as for now, he is the executive director of CARA, the Center for Applied Research on the Apostolate. And he is providing us with his wisdom and accompaniment in making research of the reality and of the necessities of taking care of the old age sisters and vulnerable sisters in their sickness in our religious life. And online with us, I think there are other sisters, and especially Sister Kalozin, who represents the LCWR, as together with LCWR and UISG, this project will be developed. So thank you, and I'm quite emotional to give her to you.
Thank you, Sister Yolanda, for those words of welcome. And now I'll ask Sister Paula to lead us in a few moments of prayer.
So we will pray today with the words of Matthew 11 to 28 to 30, where Jesus addresses us and addresses all those who require our care. And I ask Sister Pat to help us with the prayer.
The Lord says, "Come to me."
Lord, here we are before you. Help us to come to you and follow you on the way.
All you who labor and are overburdened.
Jesus, you know our labors, our loads, and the things that overburden us.
And I will give you rest.
Lord, you know that we need true rest. So please give us your restfulness.
Shoulder my yoke and learn from me.
Lord, help us to learn from you and not carry our yokes alone, but with you.
For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls.
May we experience your humility and your gentleness, so that our souls can give others the serenity and the care they need.
Yes, because my yoke is easy and my burden light. This is our prayer. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for those words of reflection. And now I'll ask Sister Jane to outline the purpose of our meeting and the new initiatives being sponsored by the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation.
Okay, thank you, Sister Pat, and thank you, Sister, for welcoming me here. Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are calling to this meeting today. I bring you greetings from the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation and a team of 8 that we work together, supporting women religious globally and accompanying each other. So I am delighted to be here today, and thank you for joining us. After a really profound 1 week at the UILG meeting, embracing vulnerability on the synodal journey, we all know that we need to embrace vulnerability that comes with aging. Today, we are launching an important 2-part initiative about the care of our aging members. And while I was reflecting, Psalms 90 verse 10 stuck in me. We live for 70 years or 80 years if we are healthy or strong. And most of these are troubles and sorrow. How can we embrace the changes that come with aging? Spiritual inner strength is very important, but also physical and financial well-being to support healthcare needs for vital living of our members is critical. We know that due to improved medicine and healthcare, people are living longer. And in many of our communities, we have our sisters living beyond 100 years. It is a blessing, and we thank God for the gift of life. We at the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation operate the Catholic Sisters Initiative as one of the important programs instructed Mr. Hilton in his will. Give aid to their protectors and defenders, the sisters, who devote their love and life's work for the good of mankind. For they appeal especially to me as being deserving of help from the foundation. So the initiatives we are launching today, it's really written in the will of Mr. Hilton. After many years of service, and sometimes in very difficult and far-to-reach areas, the foundation believes that supporting our elderly sisters is an act of faith, hope, and love. Indeed, to care for those who once cared for us and on whose shoulders we rest is a great honor for me. We already have reasons why Catholic sisters experience challenge in the provision of quality elderly care. For example, working in remote regions where the sisters are present not because of salaries, but because they accompany the poor, the underserved, and marginalized. So they really exemplify the Catholic social teaching. So the carer needs care. And what we are doing at the Hilton Foundation follows Mr. Hilton's encouragement, as he said, love one another, for that is the whole law. So our fellow men and women deserve to be loved and encouraged, never to be abandoned, to wander alone in poverty and darkness. Our sisters need care and our sisters need support. The Catholic Sisters Initiative puts the well-being of sisters and their ministries at the core of our funding. The ongoing formation, education, and sustainability of sisters' congregation. Therefore, ensuring that our sisters lead a dignified life as they age, not just physically, but also spiritually, and ensuring that we all and our congregations are prepared to provide that dignity is a fundamental goal for our initiative. The premise of the Hilton Foundation perspective of care of our elderly sisters is critical. One, our elderly sisters are one of our greatest blessings. Their lives are a testimony to their love and commitment to humanity in the image of Christ and a spirit of synodality we and they share in the communion, mission, and fraternity. An accompaniment after years of service is important. Our elderly and infirm sisters are a source of inspiration and wisdom, of living fidelity to religious life entirely. On their shoulders we stand. While we may talk about aging as a problem, it is not a problem for us. It is a blessing, and one which we all hope each one of us will partake. And therefore, a healthy and meaningful life is important. Today, we are launching 2 initiatives, but these 2 will eventually be under one umbrella, care of our aging sisters. The Hilton Foundation made an investment of $5 million to support this initiative on the care of sisters. I am deeply grateful to Sister Pat Murray, the UISG Executive Secretary, and Sister Carol Zinn, Executive Director of LCWR, and the Global Advisory Committee for their efforts in shaping the implementation for this workstream. The second initiative is about Catholic Sisters Aging Initiative, which will serve as an overarching anchor of entire elderly care to ensure quality care, research, and best practices to support women religious globally. The origin of this fund, one of the greatest challenges we have seen facing is Alzheimer's disease and its gradual theft of our sisters' consciousness and capacity. Each Alzheimer's patient is unique in the diagnosis, medication, and therapy, and therefore we need to be attentive. This global initiative will provide resources to congregations and conferences for education, training, assessment, and direct service. Again, thank you to you, Sister Pat, and thank you to Sister Carol and all the sisters in the advisory committee you've been working together. So we are all here today to pronounce this particular commitment. You will also hear today from Father Tom, who has also been accompanying us in gathering data so that as we make the decision about the investment, it is informed by your insights, the insights of you as leaders of congregations and what you are seeing on the ground. So these 2 initiatives, and particularly the one on Alzheimer's that we already have made that significant investment, is our goal to see that no sister will leave this world without experiencing the deep compassion accompanied until the end of life. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, Sister Jane, for spelling out the 2 initiatives that we're looking at today. And the remainder of this afternoon, or this session, will be divided in 2. In this first part, we'll look at the work that's happened to date in the area of cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease, because we need to understand the challenge. This challenge is there in every part of the world. You will hear a little later what we've done so far, but one of the things we have established between UISG and LCWR is a committee, a working group of sisters and lay people who are already involved in accompanying sisters with cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease. So I'm going to call on one of those people, Sister Mary Peter Lillian de Maria, who is a Carmelite sister and who is the director of the Avila Center in the United States. And she and her congregation have wide experience in this area. So she's going to speak to us online. And her topic is cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, understanding the challenge. So I welcome you, Sister Peter, and give you the floor, I could say, give you the screen.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here and to represent the wonderful work that has begun, thanks to the Hilton Foundation, and certainly for the leaders of Sister Pat, Sister Carol, and Sister Jane. I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about, cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, unlocking the challenges, and how do we provide hope. The work that I do today is really educational purposes. I'm not, giving you any medical advice, but more for education. I think every person listening today may know someone who is showing signs of memory impairment. These signs of cognitive impairment begin to bring many challenges and many times different ones every day. How do we unlock those challenges? I believe by using the keys of hope, which is education, by educating ourselves about cognitive impairment, dementia, and especially Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common cause of dementia. Secondly, by continually assessing the person for what they can continue to do and what modifications we might make to help them remain independent as possible. And lastly, training those who care for and live with the person on the proper interventions that can bring positive solutions. So recognizing the signs of cognitive impairment, assessing the cause of the cognitive impairment to dementia, and understanding pseudo-dementia, which I'm going to speak about in a couple of minutes. Educating and training all caregivers and developing and implementing interventions. I think an understanding of what dementia is extremely important, because when somebody says that someone has dementia, basically what we're saying is that it's a group of symptoms, including difficulty with memory, language, problem solving, and difficulty in cognitive skills that affect a person's independence in performing everyday activities. Every time somebody thinks that they have forgotten something, they automatically think they have, oh no, I'm getting Alzheimer's disease. I think we have to understand that there is age-associated memory loss. As all of us get older, we begin to lose more neurons. We lose more neurons than we can make. So we get a little forgetful, or we might be a little slower to respond to a question. We may have reduced speed in processing new information. That is why assessment is so important and knowledge is so important, because there's so many variabilities. A person 102, 104 can be just as viable and cognitively intact as someone who's 62 or 42. But we also have to look at that sometimes younger, 60s, 70s, maybe having some memory concerns and memory problems. And it's based on a lot of variables. It could be previous lifestyle, it could be genetics or other health issues. It could be medications. So when you hear the word dementia or cognitive impairment, especially dementia is a diagnosis. It's not a disease. Some people begin to experience more rapid loss of memory, difficulty with speech and language, difficulty planning to perform tasks, or they may have a lost ability to recognize objects, persons, sounds, shapes, or smells. When losses interfere with ability to function, this is not normal aging. There are over 60 different conditions that can cause dementia. The vast majority is caused by specific disease. Both the specific diseases and conditions can gradually destroy brain cells and lead to a progressive decline in mental function. But there are other causes that can also be other conditions, such as tumors, maybe a traumatic brain injury. Multiple sclerosis is a disease, alcohol dementia. So looking at and understanding the correct diagnosis of what's causing the cognitive impairment is critical, and being able to provide the appropriate interventions. For instance, as I said, in order to do that care, some of the diagnosis could be and can be Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is the most common of dementias, accounting for about 2/3 of the cases. It causes a gradual decline in cognitive abilities, often beginning with memory loss. Alzheimer's disease is characterized by two abnormalities in the brain. You have amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. The plaques are abnormal clumps of protein called beta amyloid. The tangles are bundles of twisted filaments made up of a protein called tau. Plaques and tangles stop communication between nerve cells and cause them to die. We also have what we call vascular dementia. Vascular dementia is also can cause cognitive impairment caused by different damage to the blood cells in the brain. It can be caused by a single stroke or by several strokes occurring over time. So Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, they may look similar, but they are very different in what's causing the dementia. We also have what we call Lewy body disease. It's characterized by the presence of Lewy bodies in the brain. Lewy bodies are abnormal clumps of the protein that's developed inside the nerve cells. Again, the reason it's so important for assessment and education is that when you look at Lewy body, people can go from almost normal performance to severe confusion within short periods of time. Many times there's visual hallucinations that are also common. We can also have something called Parkinson's disease dementia. When movement symptoms appear first, Parkinson's disease is often diagnosed. As Parkinson's disease progresses, most people will develop dementia. But when cognitive symptoms appear first, this is diagnosed as dementia with Lewy body. Lewy body disease sometimes co-occurs with Alzheimer's disease. I'm just giving you a few examples of why unlocking and understanding the challenges of cognitive impairment is key to helping us to understand how we care for our aged sisters, especially those who have Alzheimer's disease or other memory impairment. Dementia, as I said earlier, it is a diagnosis. It's letting us know that these are the symptoms. There is also something that we have to be aware of, and that is pseudo-dementia. Pseudo-dementia looks like dementia, and it's often misdiagnosed. And two of them that I can think of would be delirium and depression. A thorough and accurate assessment is critical because the diseases that I listed in the last slide are progressive, irreversible, and currently they have no cure. Whereas delirium, which looks like dementia, is often seen in older persons, especially when they return from the hospital. It's a lot less often seen after a change, say, in meds or roommates, but it's very often when somebody returns from the hospital. How delirium looks different from dementia? It appears and disappears quickly. It fluctuates over hours and days, impairs consciousness processing and attention, but not in speech. And it changes sleep cycles. Delirium can be treated. Hence, it's extremely important to know that that's what you are working with. Another pseudodementia I just mentioned was depression. Depression can often overlap dementia symptoms. Oftentimes, somebody who is depressed, they have really short answers. You ask them how they are, what's going on, what are you doing? I don't know. They might say, I don't know, I don't know. Or they may have no response to questions. Somebody who has maybe Alzheimer's or dementia, they will try and answer the questions. To people with depression, they maintain their motor skills and their language and their ability to communicate. Depression can be treated. So again, the importance of education, understanding Alzheimer's disease. This is why this initiative is so important, because of the people we live with and the memory impairment that we see. How do we look at and say, what can we do to help that person that's having those cognitive impairment? What are the things that we would do? Well, we would certainly ask a clinician to examine them. And a clinician would do different things. For instance, first of all, they would take a medical history and a medical diagnosis to find out what is happening with the person. The absolute diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease can only be made on autopsy. However, physicians at specialized centers can diagnose Alzheimer's disease within like 90% certainty based on this clinical information. To make the diagnosis, the following may need to be conducted: a medical history and neurological exam, neuropsychological testing, or something of the nature of neuropsychological testing, which involves a careful analysis of the person's memory problem, solving language, attention, and visual spatial ability. Basic blood tests. Blood tests may be used to help exclude other causes of memory difficulties. For example, a person with a thyroid disorder or a vitamin deficiency may have problems with his or her memory. Brain scans. A brain scan such as an MRI or a CAT scan may need to be done in certain patients to detect brain tumors or strokes. All of these things may cause memory problems. And it's important to have that clinician establish a baseline so we know where we are going with and understanding what's happening with this person who has this memory problem. For instance, if somebody is diagnosed and they say the memory problem, the cognitive impairment is being caused by Alzheimer's disease, that is saying that this person is experiencing memory, thinking, and behavior symptoms. We can help them by doing proactive interventions. We know that they're having a difficult time learning new things. So what do we need to do? Routine. Routine is very important to them. Recognizing or naming objects are difficult for them. What do we do as caregivers? Learn their new language. What do they mean when they are trying to express themselves? Abstract thinking and judgment is difficult. What do we do as caregivers or people who live with people who have Alzheimer's? We offer cues and suggestions, and structure is important. They're not doing it on purpose. It's the disease that is speaking to us, not the person. They may have problems with speaking or motor control and tasks. Patience is what we need, and help to simplify the tasks for the person. Again, the importance of understanding what we are doing in a disease by preparing the interventions that will be most appropriate. That's why this initiative is so crucial for all of us who live in community, for all of us of our congregations, to understand the assessment is the important piece, and the education, so that we all know and we all care for each other. And it's so important. Sometimes we may see a personality or a behavior change in a sister that we know so well. So sufficient training to identify that situation and modify the environment, the tasks, are going to be very important, because you may see them more anxious or depressed. They may be suspicious and feel, more agitated, and there might be more wandering. So if we understand what's happening in the disease process, we can provide the interventions. It is so important, as we continue to look at all these different ways to care for our people, our sisters especially, is that we know that there is hope. There is hope in the more that we learn, because there are many challenges, but there's many things that we can do the more that we educate ourselves. For instance, for all of us, no matter what age we are right now, it is really important that we pay special attention to our diet, to exercise, to being social, to being very, our spirituality and having purpose, because any activity that reduces the risk of brain function loss due to poor lifestyle choices will allow us to help maybe ward off longer these things that can happen to us as we get older. If someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's or a memory impairment, any activity that stops or inhibits further brain function or loss by management, such as looking at the medications, looking at stress reduction. Stress can cause a lot of things. How many times we're running around doing 100 things and we're getting a little forgetful, and we think, oh no, it's Alzheimer's. Well, it might have to do with the fact that we're very stressed and our brain can only function so well under less stress. And how do we then help with the activities of daily living? What types of therapies can we use? So there are keys of hope. As much as it is a challenge, the more we learn, the more we know. And I know that Sister Carol is going to explain to you with the initiative that all our colleagues have been working on for the last few months, because we can look at keys of hope of self-support, peer support, scheduling programs together, or scheduling individual programs that will be helpful for each of us. So remember, to help with this challenge, we need to educate everyone about cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's disease. We have to assess the person to identify what is causing the dementia and put a plan in place to address the related issues that come with that. And lastly, train all caregivers to provide appropriate interventions for each person and execute a plan. So in summary, most of us will age normally, especially if we maintain a healthy diet, remain social, and stay active. Also maintaining purpose in life. If there are symptoms of dementia or cognitive impairment, it's best to detect and diagnose to avoid pseudo-dementias, that depression and delirium I was talking about as well, because then we can make early adjustments. And lastly, recognize the limitations the person might be experiencing and discuss and plan for physical and support adjustments, and to help identify sources of help that we can provide. Because as we know, our elders, our elderly sisters, our elderly members of our communities are a true blessing, a blessing to embrace, to allow us to continue the work that the Lord has asked each of us to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Peter Lillian, for your overview of what is a much more complex scenario than we often know it to be. I think you, with such compassion and love, pointed out the many things we can do, particularly that we educate ourselves and the members of our communities, so we understand and are able to differentiate the different kinds of cognitive impairment, and also that we learn for ourselves living in community and for those who are caregivers the very practical things that can be done in order to provide the structure and the stability that our sisters need when living with these challenges. And I think above all, you pointed out that there are many keys of hope, but there are also many signs to us, as you said, to live a balanced life which keeps our memories alive and active, our brains engaged. Diet, social interaction, having a strong purpose in life, and having a deep spirituality. So we're very grateful for that overview. And as you mentioned, a group have been working for a number of months. And I'm going to call on Sister Carol Zinn, the Executive Director of LCWR, who's accompanied by one of the commission members, Marion Bream, and the two will speak to us. I just remind you both that, remember, we're translating in many languages, so just that you keep that in mind when you're pacing your intervention, because some languages take a longer space to translate. So we really appreciate your presence with us today and for the work that's been accomplished so far. So over to you, Carl and Marion.
Thank you so much, Pat. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. And hello, my dear sister and friend, Marion, from the advisory group. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Peter, for that just wonderful overview and doorway for both Marion and I to speak for a few moments. We've been invited to try to share in a few minutes, how did we respond to this challenge? First of all, with great gratitude to the Hilton Foundation and to Sister Jane. And so when Sister Pat and I were asked if we would be co-directors of this wonderful initiative, of course, our answer was yes. What a privilege and an honor to be engaged in such a ministry in service of our sisters who have built our congregations and who have laid the groundwork for many of us to walk the path now. And then after we expressed our gratitude, then we said, now what? And so we decided that since this was a global initiative, that we needed to pay attention to at least three things. First of all, culture. Secondly, congregations. And thirdly, competency. The culture piece, of course, is because this is a global initiative. And so between UISG and LCWR, we said, let's at least start with Global South and Global North in looking for others with the competency to help us think about this initiative. And so we are honored to have about 20 people from around the world with the expertise of someone like Sister Peter, as we just heard, and Marion, and many others of the advisory group who are actually on this call. We have been meeting, some of us since last July, all of us since the fall of this year, September, October. So we wanted to pay attention to the cultural sensitivity around, it's certainly around aging, but in particular around cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's. And we also knew that we needed the competency of those who understand what this journey is and how we as Catholic sisters might be able to be of service. We also wanted to pay attention to congregations. Some congregations are international, some are just in specific countries, some are large, some are small, some have resources of medical expertise and finances, some have fewer resources. So there was a lot of complexity, as you can imagine. So one of the first things we did when we gathered everyone was we thought, let's think about how do we plan to plan. So of course, for the sisters who are online, you will know the first thing we tried to do was to articulate a purpose statement. And so I think one of our friends has that purpose statement. I would just like to show it to you for a moment if we can. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Flo. You see, after Sister Peter's sharing a couple minutes ago, that we are entitling this Catholic Sisters Cognitive Impairment Alzheimer's Global Initiative. And you will be receiving a copy of this in the languages of UISG. But I thought I would just point out to you the main reasons and the main approach to this initiative. You will see that one of the things we want to do is to identify the need. And that's of congregations, leaders, local communities, healthcare administrators, and so forth. We want to provide appropriate education and support services. Because as Sister Peter just said, the most important outcome of this work is that our sisters can live a rich, vibrant, dignified life. So we know we need to provide education and support services. Third point there, we want to empower the sisters and all those caring for the sisters to work with the professionals so that we can understand, as Sister Peter just said, how we can accompany our sisters. The fourth point there, we also want to encourage how we might work together, inter-congregational initiatives, so that we can help each other across cultures, across congregations, and across countries. And probably the most important point on this purpose statement is the last phrase there. We want to develop the theology and spirituality that is needed in order to shape and advocate for dementia-inclusive communities. And of course, not only in religious life, but in the church and in the larger world. Our group, the advisory group, realized that the theology and spirituality that is needed in order to learn how to accompany all those, including sisters, living with dementia, cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, is really a contribution that this Catholic Sisters Initiative can make. Thank you very much. If you can stop sharing the screen. Thank you. So I want to just ask Marion if she would speak for a few minutes about the way we went about doing our work. We organized ourselves into some working groups. Marion, please.
Thank you, Sister Carol. And good afternoon, sisters. Good morning, sisters. Before I begin, I just want to say how grateful and just how moving this is to be part of this initiative. And as Sister Carol had said, the advisory group has split off into different working groups. And I just briefly want to talk about some of the work excuse me, that the group has done. The first one, and the one that probably affects all the sisters who are on the call today most immediately, is the survey group. And this group spent many hours drafting a questionnaire that I believe you will all be getting shortly to ask you about information from your congregation. And as you can imagine, this is really very important for the working groups to have this information so that we can then go ahead and provide programs that will be most meaningful for your congregations. Another group, and Sister Peter and Sister Carol have already mentioned this, but there is a theology and a spirituality group. And as we've heard today already, as a sister would go through the journey of dementia, her spirituality may look a little bit different. And so we need to put together a plan to how to help that sister and reconnect to her spirituality in every way she can. I can tell you that in working with a dementia program at the Villa, there have been many times when pastoral care or spiritual directors or retreat masters would come to me and say, Marion, I met with Sister again. There seems to be changes in her cognitively, in how she is listening to what we're saying. Sometimes there's issues with articulation, word finding, that sort of thing. And so I've seen for many years now a real need for us to help those folks understand what happens as the progression continues. And then there is the educational group, and there's two of those groups, and Sister Peter is also, she leads the other educational group. And what we plan to do is to focus on two target audiences, two of them. One are the sisters who are caring for sisters with dementia, and the other is for the sister who has dementia herself. And what we plan to do is to, and we've already started some of this, is to put together programs that, number one, educate this whole didactic idea, which is crucial. And where we will talk about the progression, the presentation of the disease, how the ability of a sister may change gradually over time. And we've talked for many months now about establishing a video library. And the video library will be available to any of the congregations, and they will be on the topics that we hear a lot about that become challenges as the sister's progression continues. A lot of these challenges may be in what we call ADLs, activities of daily living. They may be issues around eating, around bathing, about dressing. We are looking at a whole program on behaviors as communication, which is such an important topic for caregivers to understand. And finally, sisters, I just need to say that what we have at the basis of all of the work that we are doing and planning to do is to enable each sister with dementia to continue to live her vocation in the spirit of the mission and the charism of the congregation she entered. Thank you, sisters, for your time. Sister Carol?
Thanks very much, Marion. And so you can see that we have been working at this for several months now. And as Marion said, the working groups have completed the questions for the survey. And that is now in the good hands of our friend, Father Tom Gaunt, with the expertise of Kara. And so you will be receiving that through UISG. All of the communications will be going through UISG. So thank you very much, and thanks to the rest of the advisory group members who are on this call this morning. Sister Pat, back to you.
Thank you very much, Sister Carol and Marion, for giving us a flavour of the work to date. As you mentioned, the committee, working in 4 groups, has achieved an enormous amount in this short time, and we're building a worldwide community. So to the congregational leaders who are listening today, I'm asking you, if you have a sister in your part of the world who has some experience or practical knowledge or is working with sisters with dementia or pastorally accompanying them, please contact us so that person might become a member of this extended global team. We lack members from America Latina, from Africa, and from Asia. We have some, but not enough. So I ask the delegates here present that if you can do some research to identify people in your part of the world, we'd be very grateful. And so we're just going to take 10 minutes now for your comments or your questions. At least we can raise questions. We may not have the answers. So just if you like to take a little conversation at your table for 2 or 3 minutes, then I'll call you back to order so we can ask you to respond into the main hall, and those online could put their questions in the chat box. So 3 minutes buzz at the table before we come back into the main group. Thank you.
I want to ask also people who are online to rename yourself. Put the language before your name or you send it by chat. Si vous pouvez changer votre nom pour le travail de groupe tout à l'heure, ou m'envoyer un message pour me dire quelle langue vous parlez. Merci. Si potete scrivere nel chat o cambiare il vostro nome per mettere la lingua, per favore. Grazie.
Now, I hate to break up the conversation, but I'd be very, very interested. Just put up your hand if you have a comment or a question. And even if you haven't one now, you can share it with us afterwards. And I know it's a short time, but often what we think of spontaneously can be helpful. So anyone who'd like to speak, just put up your hand. Yes, the back table. Yeah.
I want to share that one of the challenges that we have found more often is in the medical profession itself, is the doctors. That there are just way too many doctors who will often say, oh, it's just old age. You're just getting old, your memory's going. And they just don't want to follow up with neurological examinations and all this that Sister Peter shared with us. And I know we often, we have a list of doctors that have followed through appropriately. And when a sister will go to her own doctor and the doctor just shoves her off, then we encourage the sister to see one of these other doctors. And they can do wonders, but I mean, it's just that whole mentality from the medical profession yet that is still, it's just old age. I don't know how you deal with that other than just not going to those doctors anymore.
Maybe it also points to the fact that we could get training for some sisters in appropriate ways of accompanying. I think we have to look maybe to training within as well as the medical help, but you make a very, very good point. Thank you. Nieves.
Una pregunta.
I have a question. I do not know. Just a second. Well, maybe because I do not have the right information, or maybe I'm going to address something that you will probably tell us later on. What is the concrete, objective of this program? Is it to provide support, to develop a specific program? Because I know these programs, some of them, probably you already said that and I did not realize, or maybe we already said how this program will be completed.
Yeah, okay, I translated to Jane. The point is, what is the last goal? What is the horizon of this project at the end? Because I'm not aware, but I am not knowing whether it will be presented still. But I think Jane is willing to respond.
Yeah. Okay.
The overall goal, like I said, we've made a significant investment through the UIG. You, like the one who talked about the training, if there is need for the training of sisters in geriatric care, as Sister Peters was talking about, then in your region, could there be some sisters who could be trained so that then they can be of support to the sisters who are suffering in Alzheimer's? So in your region, that's what the resources will be formed. And that's why this initiative is being managed but under the UIG in the leadership of Sister Carol and Sister Pat has been very critical, and that committee that is global, because servicing the needs of those sisters, of the congregations, through the conferences of major superiors, it might be a pathway so that those sisters can be accompanied until the end of time.
But but there will be,
Gracias.
but there will be, of course, horizons that will come out while the study of data will be collected. Because it is one of the commissions is working on data, on taking the reality, But for instance, how wonderful can be one of the horizons, for instance, intercongregational collaboration in creating spaces for care, for instance.
Monica, I see you.
I was going to say, I think I was very interested in, how we accompany spiritually people through this journey as well,
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting area.
Yeah, and there are some sisters who already have spent time studying this area and have resources and approaches to share. So there's much to build on. I'm going to take one last comment. Yes, Frank.
Yes, again, deep gratitude for this project. One insight that came to me is that while we are looking at caring for our elderly sisters who may be facing this challenge, it's also helpful to be educating the younger ones on lifestyle. That would also help us. Then the second one is a question to you, Pat. I know you are looking for sisters to join the team. I need clarity, like when I'm presenting it, what exactly would these people on this team be doing and what time requirement would it take?
We're looking for sisters who have, if you like, experience of working with sisters who have dementia, who have already accompanied them. They may not have received training themselves yet, but they may be trained pastorally, and their pastoral commitment has been with sisters who have some sort of cognitive challenge. And we need different cultural perspectives, because as Sister Carol said, we're approaching this culturally, congregationally, and with competence. So a solution in one culture might not work in another. For example, I heard one of the people with great skills in this area saying in her country, singing with the sisters is most effective, and finding the songs they know and helps them to pray in a new way, to go back in their memory to what was important to them in their youth. I think we've a lot of work to do here, but we need to hear the cultural context in which, and then maybe to challenge cultures which look on this some way as a curse. That it's looked on in different cultures in different ways. People are hidden away, maybe even. So I think we've quite a challenge here. Jane?
So I would like to add, these sisters would serve as a resource, not only for your congregation, but also for others in the conference within that particular region. Sometimes even the places where we call our elderly care homes is just 4 walls. And sometimes sisters who are experiencing cognitive impairment, they like to move and walk, maybe that's how they help to relax themselves. So if you put that sister in a room and lock the room because she might wander and go away, it doesn't help. Where is our compassion and accompaniment, and how do we create a space that sister is not tied to her bed or tied, even the bathroom? How is it accessible? So if you have those sisters, particularly sisters who have charisms of caring for the elderly, they could educate other sisters within a particular culture and particular country. And remember, we are talking this initiative we are launching today of sisters who are suffering from cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's. We are on the planning phase for a larger initiative because even us who are able now to do work independently, we are heading there at old age at some point. And sometimes we've seen, and many sisters have talked to me, when it comes to the time for you to move to elderly care, you say, I can't go there. Some have described it as sort of a death sentence to go there. So how do we begin preparing our sisters early on in life to transition and know that this is coming? And when that time comes, they are open to embrace it with them, to embrace that vulnerability, but also to step forward. So that initiative is coming, and I will be sharing towards the end of maybe what might be the next steps. And it might begin as early as in your 20s. Thank you.
I know there are comments from online participants, and we're not going to ignore them. We just leave them there on the board for the moment. We can read them. We're going to take a 5-minute break before we begin the second half of the program. I just invite you to stand up and just not to walk too far. It's more a comfort break before we begin part 2. We're doing well. Sisters, can I invite you back to the tables? And now, as we return to part 2 of our session, which is focusing on the general area of aging, Father Tom will present first of all, and then Sister Mary Peter will come back and give us an approach to assessment, giving us some information on how to assess needs of sisters who are aging. And then there'll be time for table conversation. So, Father Tom, we welcome you. And Father Tom has been present at our past webinars, and he's building on that. So we look forward to what you have to say to us today.
Thank you very much, Sister Pat. If you could begin the PowerPoint slides. Thank you. The research team at CARA has been working closely with UISG and the Hilton Foundation to gather data on the challenge of caring for aging and infirm sisters. And CARA will continue to assist with this in the coming months. What I would like to do now is to briefly review some of the data that we have gathered so far. Next slide. It's important as we look at all of this and the many issues involved to keep in mind that context is important and that change is ever present. This is very important for religious life. We have to resist the temptation that religious life, as we have known it in recent decades, is the way it's going to be always. Religious life has been part of the church for nearly 2,000 years, and it is constantly changing. It has its peaks and its valleys. There's always something new and different. And to recognize that religious communities are very different in terms of their size, in terms of the age of their members, in terms of the social context in which they live and they minister. The next slide, please. Last year, CARA and its research partners in Kenya and Mexico conducted several focus groups of major superiors in each country, in Kenya, Mexico, and the United States. And we found that among all these different major superiors, they identified two major issues. The first was providing for the general well-being of their aging and ailing members. They spoke about the challenge of finding and hiring the right personnel to assist the leadership of the Institute and to care for their members. Also, having the challenge of trying to have all of their ailing sisters in one facility, from assisted care to hospice care, and the need to be collaborating with other congregations to try and share in their resources. The second major issue was financing the general needs of the congregation. And so looked at collaborating with other congregations on financial matters. How could they help one another? The challenge of hiring a business manager for the congregation, that finances have become either too complicated or sophisticated for some of the congregations to manage just by themselves. And then learning how to better estimate and plan for the cost associated with outside care for their sisters. Again, these are the comments and needs that major superiors in Kenya, in Mexico, and in the United States identify. The next slide, please. At the first webinar in March 9th, there were somewhere near 450 participating major superiors. And at the end of that webinar, they were all asked to identify what were the most important issues that they faced. And they identified issues that could be put under two headings, that of accompaniment and for planning and physical needs. And so for accompaniment, they identified providing ongoing formation for members of their community about aging. And then the need to train younger members to accompany elder sisters, especially in terms of spirituality, their psychological being, and their emotional well-being. The issues related to planning for physical needs focused on appropriate facilities for the care of elderly members, having sufficient financial resources, dealing with the challenge of an increasing number of elderly members while having a decreasing number of younger members, and the long-term planning for elderly care, looking 5, 10, 20 years into the future. And a small number of major superiors simply said they had no elderly members and that this was not an immediate issue for them. Their time will come. The next slide, please. At the conclusion of the second webinar on April 11th, there were over 300 participating major superiors. And at the end of that webinar, they were asked, what do you perceive are the greatest needs at this time? And among the 7 needs, they put the highest priority on 4 of them. The first was providing professional training. And we see here that 68%, 2/3 of the major superiors identified this as a high priority. Formation for leaders, sisters, and caregivers. Another 68%, 2/3, said this was a high priority. Provision of spiritual and pastoral care and support. Altogether, this had the highest priority. 77% said this was a high priority for their sisters. And then providing for general health care of the elderly members. Again, 67%, 2/3 said this was a high priority. The needs in terms of adapting housing for elderly care, providing for medical intervention, the construction of intercongregational housing projects for elderly sisters, they were also very important, but they were not quite as the same way as these first 4. Next slide, please. A second question we asked to that group of the 300 major superiors in April, it was, what future actions will you take to address these issues. And we see here that over one half, 55%, focused on improving spiritual and pastoral accompaniment of elderly sisters. Nearly another half, 44%, cited organizing formation for the leaders of the congregation, for sisters and the caregivers. And then about 1/3 noted that collaborating with other congregations and financial planning to meet the needs of elderly sisters were future actions that they needed to take. I think it most interesting that one of the items that came up from our earliest focus groups in the United States, Mexico, Kenya, but has been consistent, was a particular focus on the spiritual care and accompaniment of the elderly sisters. Recognizing that as sisters have become older, they may not be mobile or as actively engaged. They still have a spiritual life. They still have an intellect. They want to be engaged. And how do we respond to that and engage them appropriately? We also see the needs here, again, for caring for those sisters who are beginning to experience dementia or Alzheimer's, and the needs to be able to respond to them appropriately. So these are the data that we have been collecting, and we are continuing to collect more data in the coming months. We will soon be working with Sister Carol to send out a survey to all the major superiors focused on the care and needs for sisters with dementia or the onset of Alzheimer's. So as you can see through this process, that Sister Carol, Sister Mary Peter Lillian, Sister Jane, Sister Pat, they have been carefully listening to the needs that major superiors have expressed to us early on in the year and through the 2 preceding webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Tom, because your presentation has led us through the steps we've taken to date and the clear directions that are arising from the webinars to date, and also from your research in the US, Mexico, and Kenya. It's been very helpful. So we're going to listen to Sister Mary Peter on the whole question of assessment for the next 10 minutes. And again, just remembering the pacing of the intervention so that we can, that the translators can keep pace. I do know that there is a slide presentation, I think, to accompany Sister Mary Peter's presentation. So if you can identify her, and then we'll begin the presentation. After that, Sister Paula will organize the working groups and lead that for the next period. So Florence and Therese. And you have the PowerPoint, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Sister. Thank you, Sister Pat. I appreciate that very much. And being an American and an Italian at the same time, I do speak quickly, so I'll try to be a little slower at this time. You know, listening to Father and understanding the different needs that we all have, it's pretty daunting. And how do you put all of this together in one place to be able to assess all the areas that we are all facing each day? Next slide, please. A community assessment brings answers to those questions, such as what are the strengths in your community? What health concerns do your community members have? What resources, training, and education are available to address these concerns? What additional resources are needed? What are the future care needs within your community? And what can we do now to age well together? By conducting a community assessment and looking at all of those questions, community leaders can begin to answer those key questions and be able to work with a team. A team is extremely important. Understanding there are a lot of strengths in our communities. And that's what we need to concentrate on to help us with some of the health concerns that we may be experiencing as well. Next slide, please. So the purpose of a community assessment is to reach out and to outline what are the emotional, spiritual, physical, and financial information that we need to improve the care of the community that we can provide for not only for our aging sisters, for all our members. And we establish this criteria and the skills needed to minister to our elders. It's extremely important that this team and those lay people that work with us also understand that it is a vocation. It's a call. It is more than just a job that needs to be taken up, because it is a privileged vocation to serve our elders. It is a special call to embrace, not a task to complete. Next slide, please. The purpose of a community assessment is to gather sufficient information about your community using a team, which establishes your demographics, the present and your future care needs, education, and tools to assess your community in order to identify and guide you to a strategic plan that calls your community to action. Next slide. Who makes up this team? It could be a social worker, a nurse, somebody in environmental services, certainly leadership, and others that you feel are important to have as part of that team. Each person will complete the assessment in their area of expertise and then report their findings to leadership. So leadership isn't feeling that it is all on them, but they have this group that is bringing to them the attention and being able to prioritize in areas that is needed. Next slide. Areas that should be assessed. First of all, what are the health concerns of your community? Of course, we've heard today, thanks to Father, that a lot of those concerns, some of them have to do with that memory impairment, that cognitive impairment. But there are a lot of other health concerns we are experiencing. A big one, believe it or not, is orthopedics. So many people are having knees replaced, hips replaced. So looking at those health concerns as a whole, what do we do about the area that people are living in their convents, in their different areas of care centers? We would look at level of care. What is the sister doing now? What level of care are they experiencing? So if a sister is experiencing health concerns that are going to lead to more care, do we have enough areas in our community to care for those who need independent with services, assisted living, skilled care? And doing a level of care assessment allows you to project in the next 3 to 5 years, will we have enough areas of care for our sisters? What support services do we have? In America, in the United States, we have what we call licensed beds as well. What funding services? Physical space? Do we have emergency procedures in place? And what is the ongoing education that we need? When we go through all of those, then there's a summary that we can develop for a strategic plan. Next. Health concerns identify and help us to educate and implement healthy aging practices for the entire community. Now, this is when we need to do some of that education and also do some of those health things that we can do to age well together. It also helps us to summarize the health concerns that are going to be a challenge to our particular community for whatever reason it might be. Next. The level of care allows us to determine the optimal living arrangement for the members evaluated. Each sister, each member is evaluated to determine what type of care they may need now and what they may need in the future. Now, this all sounds like it's going to take forever. It doesn't take that long to do an assessment. The important piece is doing the assessment to allow us to see the level of care that person may require. Next, again, the support services that are needed. And I've already mentioned this, especially based on the healthcare assessment and the level of care. Then we put the support that is needed. Next, what areas do we assess as far as funding? Each country has their own funding sources. Some of us have, in America, we're very fortunate. We have a lot of funding resources, but it's important to know what are the other countries, what in your culture are you allowed to tap into when it comes to funding? Are they available? Are we taking an opportunity to know them and to use them? Next, physical space. Examine our physical space, focusing on the safety and the comfort of the common areas, and not only the common areas, but also the rooms that we are living in. Next, emergency procedures. To assess if there's appropriate emergency procedures in place if there is something that happens. Do we know who to call? Where does this take place? And lastly, but most importantly, is the education. To determine the educational needs of your community surrounding many aging issues, and most importantly, self-care. Are we taking care of ourselves in order for us to age well together? The pandemic really taught us quite an interesting and many different aspects of what takes place. Those 2 years have really taken a toll on many people, and especially our elders, because of the lack of socialization that took place so often. So to understand that the pandemic and other areas of education are going to be needed as we go forward. And in summary, after the assessment takes place, we have to do a summary to develop a strategic plan. So after completing the assessment of each area, a strategic plan is decided upon by leadership using this team in all those areas that I outlined to create and implement an action plan. So it's not looking at all of this all at once, but it's allowing you to be able to take each piece, assess, and then prioritize, and then be able to implement the action plan. This is a very important step, and it is very critical. So I think that as we work together and we listen to all the needs of all the communities throughout the world, I think that there is great hope that there is a way that we can tackle this and be able to do as our Lord has asked us to do, is care for one another in a loving way. Thank you.
Voy a hablar en español. Muchas gracias, hermana Peter Lillian, por ser tan clara y por ayudarnos también a mirar hacia la realidad y poder planear.
Sadly, to learn about this new reality, also to learn how to plan. Now, we will have 20 minutes of group work, and I would like to propose 2 questions that can lead your discussion, but you can feel free to use them or not, because we can also talk freely. So could we have the questions, please? Thank you.
Está en mi ordenador.
It is in my computer. Now, the first question is, what are the most important elements of capacity building that we may need as congregations? So what are the most important elements of capacity building? And in line with what Sister Peter talked to us about in terms of preparing skilled personnel to maintain or create elder health programs or to collaborate with other congregations. A second question.
Florence, if you can make it bigger, please.
Florence, could you please enlarge it a little? So the second question is, what are the top 3 financial areas of need as you look out over the next 5 years? What are the top 3 financial areas of need as you look out over the next 5 years? The first question was, what are the most important elements of capacity building? And the second question, financial areas of need. So we can start our group work. Also, the Sisters Online will be divided into groups, and we will resume our work in 20 minutes.
Also, if each group could prepare a short written report so you can share it.
Vamos a retomar.
So let us resume our proceedings. Let's resume our session. Our sisters online are joining us. Now, we will have 15 minutes of Q&A, questions and answers. I would also like to ask the sisters online to write their questions in the chat box. While here in the room, you can take the floor. We have already had some reactions. And one of the questions is for Sister Pat, and it is a question about the sisters who will work with the consultative body. How can they do that, and what language skills should they have? In what languages should they be fluent?
Thank you very much. The sisters can speak in any language because we will provide translation. I mean, it's very important we have these conversations across our languages. So translation will be provided. So not to worry about translation. And you send the name and the email address of the person to me, and just a line or two saying what her experience is in this area.
Gracias.
Thank you. So I would like to ask the sisters here in the room if you have any questions or comments. I'm going to speak French. So,
I can't speak because I can hear Marilu in Spanish. So we have different realities of communities So we have communities with elderly sisters and younger sisters. So we have both sisters. So we say to the youngest that there's a formation.
Puisque nous sommes responsables en tout temps de chaque sœur de notre congrégation.
I couldn't hear the question because of the interference. I'm not following the whole question. I'm sorry. So we want to say to the elderly that it is important to create new spaces, to find similar programs, to engage professionals, health professionals, professionals that are capable of giving this life, this boost to the community life, so the elderly sisters are not put in their rooms, isolated, alone, but so they can have everything they need in terms of health care, spiritual care, so the professionals can take care of this, of their physical care, but we as religious are more able and capable of giving them their spiritual, answering to their spiritual needs. And if we cannot do it, we have to find people who can do this. We would also like to bring up the importance if the communities, so the healthcare, so in certain countries laws are affect the healthcare system. So because some countries allow certain decisions to end life, so I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know if I can answer any of my sisters regarding the process of things. So
finales.
Thank you very much, sister, for sharing that with us. In our group, we shared several experiences, also in light of the number of sisters who start to have these needs, these health needs. And we also highlighted that it is very important to open up to intercongregational experiences so that we can address this type of needs. Because we want to offer high quality care in terms of accompaniment, spiritual accompaniment, healthcare accompaniment to our sisters. We also mentioned that this type of service will bear very high cost for our congregations. So hence it is important to collaborate with other congregations. And at the same time, we also have to help our sisters welcome this transformation, these changes in their lives. That is why it is important to form ourselves when it is still important, when it is still possible to understand this change of mentality. And maybe, perhaps, it would be important that this commission could help us form the people who will accompany these older sisters. And also, we have to provide them with high quality spiritual accompaniment. Thank you. Thank you for this project, because it is very interesting as it really touches the lives of our sisters and of our congregations.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I do not know whether you have any comments on this. Well, if it is not the case, we can go on.
On our table also, we talk about the necessity of a compensation. Also, we define the necessity of formation, the need of formations in different ways, the formation of the leaders. Those also the preparations to recognize the symptom, which is really essential, because sometimes it can create confusion when we don't have the competence that permit us to recognize the symptom, also to interfere in advance and to accompany these symptom, we can say like that. We also talk about the formations, the way holistic way. You can say that in the integral way that which contemplate the spiritual way. Also, the financial need. We also discussed about that one of the point that we see in our future is that increase the elder populations in many contexts. Also, although there are places where the collaborations and so the state also help to assist them, but to pay those people that were taking care of our elderly sometimes is a little bit difficult. Although there are also the adaptation for our structure, to adapt our structure when we have one or two sisters, we can try to, I can say, we can live and they adapt to do like small adaptations in our service. But when there are many sisters, like a group of sisters with the same problem as, we need to adapt our structures, which requires also financial needs. This is what I can share with you. Thank you.
Yolanda.
Thank you very much. Let us go on with Yolanda. Thank you. I think that we all feel the need to raise more and more awareness in our congregations, raise awareness about the needs of the elderly sisters or of Alzheimer's patients. That is why, as we pass on these data within our constellations, we also invited the various congregations to participate in the questionnaire, to answer the questionnaire, because that questionnaire can also help us educate ourselves to a new awareness, and this will be fundamental so that we will understand the implications of this phenomenon. Let us continue table 1 in Spanish. Well, we too mentioned the importance of formation. This is fundamental for all the stages of life, because of course we have problems, we have some situations for which we were trained, we were formed, and now we know what to do, when certain situations arise. But so, as we somehow move away from work, from pastoral work, well, I think that this is terrible for the person as she retires. But if in our formation we consider all the stages of life, and if our formation helps us understand all the limits that will emerge as time goes by, well, I think that this will be very helpful. Of course, this means that we will need to work on a specific project and we will need to develop it for this specific end. And at this financial level, we will also need to adapt our spaces the spaces of our houses for older sisters, so that, for instance, they can find an area for physical exercise, an area for relax, an area where they can be accompanied by a group, because these are things that will be necessary. So I really think that we have to do more from this standpoint. And when we see that a community, a given community, has a lot of older sisters, well, I think that we will make an extra effort to really build these spaces. So I think that it would be very important to offer some assistance of this kind. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let us go on back there.
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. At our table, just a few points. One is, like, for us as a congregation, we have this policy of age-friendly convents if we are building new houses, to make it age-friendly. Because in the African context, we have our elderly living with us for as long as possible, at least in the best circumstances. Now, the challenge our elderly members are sharing with us is that while they live in the community and it's working well, when the sisters go out for their ministries, they are left alone and they are lonely. So that's a question we are grappling with. How do we manage that? A question that also came on our table is, when you have members who are caring for our elderly, it can be overwhelming. How do we care for them as well? Thank you.
Yes, of course.
So I would like to respond to what Sister said about, the adaptation for our buildings. And certainly that will be part of the support. And I echo again, we are many congregations under the UISG globally. So supporting each of the congregation may be challenging. So that's why we are talking about collaboration and partnership. So that then, as we seek solutions in a particular country or in a particular region, those who are already doing it, what can we learn from them? So that as we tailor, we are not beginning something which is very, very new. But that's why the resources have been provided, and the Sister Pat and Sister Carol and the advocates have been trying to work through that, so that to see exactly what do we support a particular region or a particular country, so that then we can support those sisters. And for the sister who talked about, taking care of the carers, I think almost every of those who have spoken has talked about formation and going formation. Maybe sabbatical programs, stepping aside and go and get nourishment because before you come back to the service of care, because it can be really draining. And generally, I would not just talk about taking the care of the carer only in the issues of elderly care or Alzheimer's. It is even in the service of our ministries. Sisters who work in difficult situations, like those who are accompanying those who have been victims of trafficking, those who have been rescued, those who are working in hospitals. We saw many sisters break down during the COVID-19 because they were in frontline and responding to really and accompanying families that were experiencing grief. We have a way, through the formation programs, that we could also support those kinds of initiatives of ongoing formation. So those who are taking care of the carer, not necessarily the elderly in general, they need care too. That's why sabbatical programs are important, and we are funding sabbatical programs. Thank you.
So on this note, we will give voice to you, sister, and then we continue to our session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to highlight what also Sister Yolanda said, that
it would be necessary that the questionnaire is expanded because we are dealing with so different situations that came out in our table discussion, that we couldn't come up with one or two general ideas because our congregations are in different countries and we are dealing with different realities. So that would be very important. But one common theme that surfaced was the need for intercongregational initiatives, and whether we speak about the West or developing countries, somehow the same phenomenon. Congregations were mentioned who sold their properties or turned it over to other companies who established nursing facilities, and then they maintained a wing for their sisters. Or if we speak about Eastern Europe or developing countries, congregations have to place often their elderly in facilities run by others. But in both of these situations, we give up control. No matter how good that company may be, no matter how well intentioned, but it would be up to them what kind of approach, especially when we speak about spiritual pastoral care and attention. So we all thought that first and foremost priority should be to encourage congregations to establish together a facility where members of religious communities can be placed if necessary, because then we set the standards and the approach, and assure pastoral and spiritual care. That was common in our discussion. And then one more topic came up from experience. This happened, and it can happen, that if we have a small group who is aging and there are no other generations following, we developed procedures and strategic plan along the years together with the community, and they all accepted and they all were part of it. But becoming cognitive impaired also means that one loses insight. So by the time, or as time goes by, it becomes very difficult to implement the strategy that was developed with them years before. And then who is going to implement that? It's a big question. Gracias.
Thank you very much. So now let us move on to Sister Jane so that she could echo and summarize all the things that we heard. We heard so many challenges, so many concerns. And also, let's try and hear what the UISG and the Granting Foundation want to give us. So Sister Jane, over to you so that you can share with us your answers and your comments and also the next steps ahead.
Thank you very much, Sister Paula. First, I say thank you all, those who are online and those who are present here, for this very, very important conversation about us and about how we can care for our elderly. I think the journey has begun. And when I say the journey has begun, we are talking with each other and beginning to plan together. At first, when the foundation started about the elderly care and this conversation, each of the superior was wondering on her own and was thinking, how can you help our sisters to get dentures? How can you help us to remodel our house? How can you help us, sisters who need a wheelchair or elevator is broken? So there was a continuum of issues. And we felt that it's good to have this conversation. And I want to thank Sister Pat, Sister Carol, and also for the Tom for the research Cara has helped us to conduct, because it is surfacing these issues that each of the congregation or each leadership team is trying to struggle to solve. I like what Sister has put forward, and many of you, collaboration, intercongregational partnership within a country or a region, because this is not a unique problem to a single congregation. And if we're gonna provide solutions, we have to plan and work together. In some regions, there may be a step forward, some others are just beginning. One of the things as a foundation, we ask ourselves from an equity lens, what is the asset, the gifts, the talent you bring? Yes, we could have resources, but we cannot just put resources forward and say, okay, here is the money. But what are we really trying to achieve together? And this is what this committee, advisory committee, is gonna be putting together. I remember in our last call, Sister Pat said, what are those models that are in different continents, different countries that are really working well, that we could say, maybe we could do a similar type of model with a little bit of tweaking in one country or another country. We really need to surface that, because it will help us to expedite and be able to support the sisters. And if you recall, we had a sister from Spain, a sister from France, who have already been doing this work, and Sister Peters in the US. So that's one thing, we are having a conversation. This conversation is elevating the issues, awareness raising. For those, Father Tom said earlier that says, we don't have elderly sisters. So are you not going to plan because you don't have them today? So it's a call, you don't have them today, but in 10 or 15 or 20 years to come, you will have them. What have you been putting aside in order to begin planning for that ahead? I always say, I come from Kenya, and long back, missionaries used to come to Europe. Most of you had sisters who are missionaries, all from the US. They came to the countries in Africa, and during the summer, they came back and did mission appeals. They brought back the money to Africa or where else. But if the numbers are going down, the sisters here may not have, in the West, they may not have the resources to bring back to the emerging economies or developing world. So they also need to think out of the box. What do we need to plan and what do we need to put aside? So awareness raising for the current leaders and the leaders who are to come is important. So the other thing is care for those who are taking care. When we talk about formation and continuing formation of all, that's an area that the Hilton Foundation focuses on, and that is an area that we would like to provide through this current fund that we are launching today, but also through the Catholic Sisters Aging Care that we will be launching in the near future that we are already planning. I hope this advisory committee and many more will be working with us in planning for that, because the aging doesn't begin when you get to 80. It begins when you enter the congregation and along the continuum of that journey. And we need to begin there in order to support the sisters. Sister Peters talked about the assessment. And Okay. Yes, Sister Peter talked about the assessment. And that is important because where do you begin as the leaders of a congregation if you don't understand the whole landscape of of the care or where you need to begin investing? So what we might do or we will begin doing is perhaps take some countries where that assessment can be conducted. This is not the survey that is going to be conducted by CARA to see the entire need. The assessment is tailored to each of the congregation so that you begin prioritizing, and it might surface some of the big issues that perhaps as leaders of congregations you have not been thinking. And then if several congregations have similar type of challenge that comes into the fore, then it's a time to partner as intercongregations, either through the conferences in order to request for funds, either through the fund or anywhere else, or from us, so that then we can begin tackling those issues. So what we think of is short, medium to long-term solutions. The long term is creating this fund that all of you can take part in it globally, so that then we can help to create solutions. And the solutions we create could also be helping governments, because they might come and see this is what the sisters are doing. You know, sisters are usually beginners in many of the solutions that we provide, whether it's any education and healthcare, and then we could roll those models to other countries. If it is a question of establishing a common facility, how can that be done in a way that helps the sisters from different congregations, particularly small congregations? If there are small 10 congregations, for example, if each of you were to start your elderly care home, you have to pay for doctors, you have to pay for nurses, you have to pay for the electricity, for cooks, and all other stuff that you might hire. But if it was one facility with different wings for different community, they can leave their carries in there, and then you will have the same mass offered in the Catholic Church. You don't have to pay for 10 priests. Oh, Father Thomas, okay. And that was my group discussion here with the Sister Carmen, where possible intercongregational living might help to solve some of the challenges, which could also tackle what Sister was talking about, those small congregations. What next? If they put a strategy together and they cannot be able to implement that strategy because they are so few, who else is going to take that responsibility? And how can we create that global sisterhood, not just in words, but also in action? So the Hilton Foundation is available, and I know there are many other foundations that could help support along this continuum. But also, say we are encouraging congregations, look at the assets you have. If it is land, how can that be used, land be used as an asset, either being leased out in order to bring income that you can be able to invest? I want to share a few of research that we're doing, because research is critical, as in it's important. Because as you saw Father Tom presenting, you could tell across the board, if your congregation was not having this challenge, it was having the other. And it's as a result of bringing data together and the voices of each of you. In the United States, we are also conducting a research on congregations that are adequately funded in their aging liabilities. Thanks to CARA and also RICRI and also LCWR and CMSWR, the congregations that can say, at least we can break through. We don't have everything, but what is that they put? How did they put? What process did they go through? And how did they start kind of a fund, or what is those ingredients they help them to plan? And if they plan and they can be able to support their sisters, what does that template look like? What are those ingredients? Be able to learn so that they can start doing this early on without first waiting and saying, who are we going to bring the funding for? Because the sisters who is in bed and in need of care cannot wait for you to write a grant so that you be funded. They need the care right now. That's why we really want to support direct service so that those sisters can be accompanied now, not tomorrow. We need help. As we plan for next day and the medium to long term, then we need the care of the sisters. I want to say the final point. Taking care of our elderly sisters and also sisters who are infirm, it's an act of compassion, but also it's a human rights question. It's a human right. And when we talk about safeguarding, we are not talking only safeguarding children and safeguarding those who are ill. We are talking of also safeguarding the integrity, fragility, and well-being of women who have given all they are. So if we, when we talk about safeguarding, there is a whole menu and continuum, putting guidelines, the guidelines of how we care. And honestly, we know that there are some places a sister is locked in a room almost all day and told, there is no, it's time to sleep now, just sleep. There is a way we could do that better. And we are here to work with each other so that you don't have to get worried in your leadership and working with your team to set also those parameters and guidelines so that those who step on your shoes tomorrow, they can also know what to do and where to go. So basically, we have several research that are going on, and we will share those research with you through the UISG so that you can take those best practices. If there is need for consultants who will work with the leadership teams in order to prepare those guidelines once the assessment has been done, because it's one thing to get the report, but then where the rubber meets the road is beginning putting infrastructure in place. And that requires resources, requires consultants who have expertise in doing that. Those resources are also going to be provided so that then we can all enjoy living religious life and knowing that to the end of life, I know I have care. I will live with joy and I will live with happiness. And I believe your sisters will, including yourselves. So thank you.
It's my pleasure to say the final words this afternoon. I'm sure you were surprised, perhaps, when you read the agenda and saw this event being held in the afternoon. But it was held for a very particular purpose, because you as delegates have a very important role within your constellation. You have an important role to bring this message and this information back to the members of your constellations, either through a meeting or by writing an email or contacting them in some way by phone, WhatsApp, whatever, to say how important it is to participate in the survey. I can't emphasize that enough, because the data drives the agenda for the future. If Father Tom doesn't get the correct data, then we might set off on the wrong road. So we need the data from the congregations as much as possible.
That in the light of, in different parts of the, like a lot of international congregations, the needs in a province.
Yeah.
So would you want the provinces to be doing that as well as the leader?
Yeah, we will be involving, we will organize who's asking what to whom, so that there's clarity in terms of who's sending the information and from where. And it's a very good question, Monica, for international congregations. What data should they collect and so forth? Because in the sense in UISG, we have both the international and also the diocesan congregations. So to get accurate information, we will determine the scope of what you're being asked to do. Thank you for raising that. The other question I have is in listening that we really need to identify individuals who can be pastorally trained for this ministry. What has really struck me about the United States is how many lay people they have trained. Very competent, spiritually nourished lay people who often are better at accompanying our sisters than we ourselves for some reason. You know, it's interesting to watch. I see it in my own congregation. And the third thing I would just emphasize is not to forget the older sisters themselves. I'm thinking of several of the communities in my province in Ireland, where the nourishers are the older ones themselves. Like somebody said on one of the webinars, in some parts of the world, you have aging sisters accompanying other aging sisters. But I can think of some of the communities I know where the nourisher and the motivator is not necessarily the superior, but is someone who brings, I can think of a 94-year-old who, because of her life experience and her formation, brings energy, vision, compassion, and tenderness to her sisters. She sees this as a ministry within the community. It's not about age, it's not about the numbers. It's about the formation I think we've received right throughout our lives in nourishing one another. And she has that capacity and others have it in great measure. So I see that being something that maybe we need to train those nourishers who are there within communities. They might have a named role, but they're very important people. So it's my great pleasure to thank Father Tom, Sister Peter, Sister Carol, Marion Beam, and all who have brought great insight and vision to us today. And I particularly want to end by thanking Sister Jane, whose commitment to religious life and also to nourishing our religious life in such a way that we can live this life, as she keeps saying, with fullness to the end of time. Whatever the length of our 70 is the sum of our years, or 80 if we are strong, we don't want to do the next line, and most of them are emptiness and pain. What we want to do is to bring the fullness of life all the days of our life, which nourishes one another. So I want to, in conclusion, to thank Sister Yolanda and the board of UISG for adopting this initiative, because ultimately they're the ones who have adopted this so that we can go forward together to really bring life and vitality to religious life worldwide, particularly to the small and the vulnerable. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll see you tomorrow. Alan.
At 9.